Professor Syed Mohammed Marandi is a towering academic and intellectual and commentator, and we are very lucky to have him once again back on the Mother of All talk shows. Professor, thank you for joining us again so soon, but you're the only show in town. Iran is now at the center of the world. David Cameron, the pig farmer from England, is there now, and he's told us that there's going to be an attack on Iran and that he is going to support it. So the scene is set, isn't it, for some very dramatic events. Please tell us.
Well, the Israeli regime has threatened to attack Iran, and if they don't, it will be a humiliation in itself. But I think of all these different regimes, the United States so far has been more smart in the sense that they have said that they're opposed to another strike. And the reason is that they know that the balance of power, it lies in Iran's favor. After the Iranian strike, the Western media has been saying what a great victory this was for the Israelis, but it was a catastrophic defeat, and it goes back to your introduction, where you were saying before I spoke, where you were saying that some people in the West think that this is the world. It isn't. When the Israeli regime struck the Iranian embassy and murdered Iranians and local employees, the world was outraged. The international community was outraged. The Americans and the British and the French governments, they went to the UN Security Council and prevented a condemnation. They supported the bombing of the embassy, which is a major violation of international law, and it shows that these countries have no respect for the laws and norms that they are always, at least in theory, advocating. But the rest of the world stood with Iran. And that gave Iran the opportunity to punish the Israeli regime. What did Iran do? They sent, after 10 days of playing mind games with the Israelis, they announced that they're going to attack. They sent a couple of hundred drones, very old drones with no new technology. And the Israeli regime fell into the trap. And so did the Americans. They fired all their high-tech missiles and used all their high-tech equipment, giving Iran a huge amount of intelligence. They spent a huge amount of money. Just the Israelis alone, $1.35 billion, according to their estimates. The Americans spent a lot of money too. And the Iranians spent maybe a couple of $1 million on these old drones, so which were decoys. And then Iran sent some old missiles, and the same thing happened. And then the Iranians, alongside the old missiles, fired a handful of missiles that were more modern, not the most modern, and they went right through the defense system and hit the two bases, the air base in the south and the intelligence gathering base on the Golan Heights. And they showed the Israelis that they can't stop them, even though these two bases are probably the most well-protected bases in the world through the air defense system there. So the Iranians gained information. It was a major success. It was very inexpensive, very costly for the Americans and the Israelis, especially now that there's a shortage of these missiles because they're being used in Ukraine as well. And the Iranians also showed the Israelis that we can hit wherever we want. Now, these Western governments and the Western mainstream media can claim it was a fantastic victory for Israel, which is fine. They can believe their own propaganda. But the problem is that if they believe their propaganda, then their calculations will be wrong. And then if tomorrow the Israeli regime strikes Iran, the Iranians will strike back in a way in which they will all be stunned, because it won't be a couple of hundred old drones and a few old missiles. It will be thousands of very modern missiles and drones that will rain in onto the heads of the Israeli armed forces, and they won't be given a warning. They won't be given heads up like they did last time. So it's up to the regime, the Israeli regime. Does it want to get badly battered and believe its own propaganda and be severely punished? Or is it going to back down and move on?
Well, judging by Cameron's visit today, they're not going to back down or move on. And therefore, we must assume, unless Netanyahu is overthrown in the interim, which is, of course, a possibility, leading to at least a hiatus in which new calibrations are made, or we're into a terrible, terrible situation, which could escalate because, as I was saying earlier in my monologue, Iran has the support of China and Russia. Israel has the support of the United Kingdom, sometimes France, and a reluctant Joe Biden, who must be cursing his luck that this is all happening when he is so befuddled. Other people are having to take the decisions for him. It is therefore justifiable to say that we could be on the verge of a world conflagration. Might we not?
It's possible. It's possible. If the Israeli regime strikes Iran, Iran will strike back much harder, much harder. And that could lead to a situation where the Americans are pushed to intervene. If the Americans strike Iran, then imagine what the Iranian response will be. First of all, we have large numbers of underground bases for drones and missiles. And Iran is a very high-tech country when it comes to these military capabilities. The West themselves grudgingly acknowledge it when they claim that Iran is helping the Russians. So Iran has all these underground bases across the country with hundreds of thousands of drones and missiles. So if the Americans strike Iran, what happens? Their bases will be overrun in Iraq. The Iraqi resistance will not tolerate them. They'll be gone. And perhaps the embassy will be gone. And they will be expelled from Syria because their illegal occupation in Syria depends on Iraq. And then their bases in the Persian Gulf region will be destroyed. And these are just a couple of minutes away for Iranian missiles. And then those countries that host those bases, they will be seen as partners in crime. They will pay the price, and their oil and gas installations will be destroyed. So oil and gas in from the Caucasus and especially the Persian Gulf, they will be off the market. And that will create a global economic catastrophe, I think, far worse than 1929. So there is a possibility that we will go there. Personally, I think that there are enough sane people in the United States, pretty evil, but sane people in the United States political establishment that recognize the danger. But who knows? So we'll see if the Israeli regime, from the very beginning, this is what we were all saying. This is what you were saying. This is what I also believe, that this genocidal war, if the Americans don't pull or yank on the leash of their mad dogs in Tel Aviv, it's going to escalate. Because the Israeli regime has lost in Gaza, it's lost alongside the war in Lebanon. They're humiliated. They've across the world, they're now despised because of the genocide. So they either have to give up and be humiliated, or they have to expand the war to find a route to victory or to escape defeat. But it's only going to make things worse and more dangerous.
That was such a perfect answer. I'm almost tempted to close the interview now because that answer could scarcely be bettered. But let me ask you, if you like, a tangential question. And you're not a government representative, you're not a diplomat, so we can talk as if nobody else was present. It must have been a bitter pill to swallow that an Arab government, we've long ago given up hope of most of these Arab governments of doing anything for the Palestinians. But last weekend we saw something quite novel. We had an Arab government, which, by the way, has millions of Palestinians within its population, actually go to war for Israel, to use their military capabilities to blunt the Iranian retaliation to Israel's crime in Damascus. That must be quite a difficult thing for you to accept in Iran.
A couple of things. One is that just 2-3 weeks ago, or a bit more, before they struck the Iranian embassy, the Israelis struck an Iranian-affiliated base near Aleppo in order to help the ISIS and Al-Qaeda terrorists in Aleppo, those that are being supported by NATO and their affiliates. And they flew over the Jordanian territory to Al-Tanaf near the Iraqi border, and then flew into Syria. So they went around Syrian air defenses. And so the Jordanians allowed them to fly all the way to Iraq and then enter Syria. And then they fired their missiles at those bases and returned. By the way, the Iranians have said the equation has changed, and they, from now on, any Iranian targets anywhere, if they're attacked, citizens or assets, the Iranians will retaliate from Iran. So that is an important change, and that's going to narrow down the scope of the Israeli military's ability to function in Syria. But in any case, the Jordanians allowed them to go through their territory to bomb Syria and to help these extremist groups. But when the Iranians fired the drones, as you rightly point out, the Jordanians helped the Americans and the Israelis down them. However, and I don't have information on this, this is speculation, 100%. I have a feeling that the Iranians intentionally sent these old drones, these dirt cheap drones, over Jordan so that the Jordanian regime would expose itself and carry out these acts that they did, because that is ultimately going to make it more despised, and it puts more pressure on the regime in future when it comes to Israel and Palestine. This is just speculation. I really have no information, but I think that the Iranians did this on purpose, because ultimately these drones were not going to hit any targets. These were, as I said, drones that were cheap. They were meant to force the Israelis and the Americans to to use all their missiles, very expensive missiles, and for Iran to figure out what sort of defense capabilities they have. So they were for intelligence gathering, and the Americans and the Israelis fell into the trap. But I'm guessing that the Iranians did this so that the Jordanian regime would be put under pressure, and that would give people on the ground more incentive to put pressure on the regime with regards to what's going on in Palestine.
Now, finally, Professor, of course, the West has spent a lot of money, a lot of time fomenting opposition inside Iran and encamping some elements of opposition outside of Iran. I'm thinking of the MK terrorist outfit. I think the last time I saw they were in Albania. The puppet crown prince, so-called, the son of Pahlavi, the deposed Shah of Iran. These monarchists exist. The MK terrorists exist. A pink ramp exists. A feminist ramp exists. They have many arrows in their bag. What's the public view in Iran about the situation? Are they steady as they face this potential escalation in events? What's the parliament saying? Are there any dissenters in the government? It would be interesting for our audience to know.
You know, George, Iranians have always traditionally supported the Palestinians, but there's always been a minority in Iran that was more, let's say, liberal and pro-Western, and their views differed, always. And there's always been a debate about how much Iran should support the Palestinians and how, weapons, how much should we spend on their defenses and so on. Some believe we should do more, some less. Most, I think, believe that what we're doing now is about right, which is basically what led to the resistance being able to hold Gaza for 6-7 months, and the Lebanese Hezbollah the same. Of course, their heroics alongside those infrastructure, the infrastructure that was created. But after October the 7th and after the genocide, just like the rest of the world, just like in where you are, the mood has changed. So those who supported Palestine, they continue to support Palestine. They are, they've always been the majority. But that minority that thought we should cut a deal with the Israelis and support a two-state solution and all that, their numbers have diminished. I have a couple of people who are actually pretty close to me, and we would have discussions about Israel, and they would have differing views than me. My view has always been that it's illegitimate, and that apartheid must be altogether, the regime must be dismantled, and that Jews, Christians, and Muslims should live together as equals in the land. Those people who thought differently, they're changing. They're shifting because they're seeing the genocide. So the Israeli regime, I personally believe that the greatest defeat was not actually on the battlefield. They were defeated in Gaza. They were defeated against Lebanon. They were defeated in the exchange so far with Iran. They've been defeated by Ansarullah or the Yemeni armed forces. But the greatest defeat is due to the genocide that they're carrying out. They've destroyed themselves across the world. And of course, Western regimes are sacrificing themselves and their credibility and their image for the Israelis too. But I think that Iran, alongside the rest of the world, in Iran, the position is hardening. And this is only going to make things worse for the Israelis. And the Iranians overwhelmingly, from what I've seen, and it's anecdotal, overwhelmingly supported the Iranian strike.
Very interesting. Professor, as always, Said Mohammed Marandi, thank you for your wisdom and your time.